in section 4, as it shows on the screen, we're going to talk about logging. Now, of course, logging is very important due to the fact that well, you need to log. It's your first point of contact when trying to look for failed traffic reasons, failovers, anything like that, issues with connectivity for varying things, URLs or so on. And so it's where we first go, and of course it's a very important thing. So firstly, we need to start looking at how the Palo Alto does login, how we configure it to log, and so on. And basically, they automatically generate the login as a result of normal traffic processing. So when you set up a rule, and even if you notice at the end of the rule, we'll have a look at this in a minute, is the log forwarding. That literally refers to the log forwarding profile. The actual logging is done automatically. So as it processes the traffic, it will log to the box. Firewalls have a fixed storage, so you will have a certain amount of space on the disk on the box, and that can't be increased, as this says, except for the 7000 series, because that has a logging card. And additionally, the new 5400 uses a swappable MPC logging drive, as we see there, which is a drive that then plugs into the blade. So what this basically means is that your Palo Alto is going to log in a circular fashion, and this is pretty much the same as any system that logs this way around. So it's a sort of a first in, first out type of thing. Once the log partition fills up, it will then continue to log, but it'll overwrite the earliest logs. So the first logs that are written in will be the first ones to go. As a result of this, as it says there, logging capacities are difficult to predict. You can imagine, for instance, that if you have a baseline of traffic, okay, that's one thing, but then if you have bursty traffic, obviously then you're going to have logging that's then going to increase, and thus your partition will run out quicker. So to get to the login, so that you can start to configure it, it's device server profiles, and then you create the profiles for the servers that you'll be logging to. And we'll look at this as well in depth. So basically, it is the same all the way through the Palo Alto, so the NGFW, sort of ecosystem, so to speak. You create the profile for the log server, and then you attach that to a login profile, and that gives you that granularity then of how you can log different things to different servers. Centralized logging and reporting is achieved by forwarding logs generated by the firewall to on-premise cloud log collectors. So some examples of that would be Panorama, Cortex Data Lake, as we've seen before, Splunk. Splunk actually has a plugin separately as well. SolarWinds, XOR with syslog integration, and email. And as well as on top of that, of course, you'd have SNMP, which I don't really sort of treat specifically as login, because it's more a message, trap messages and so on. But you can create the SNMP profiles the same as other stuff. So Panorama also provides unified reporting across the managed firewalls. So you will see that a global setting is to log the Panorama, and then you've then got your Panorama sort of connectivity, so where your Panorama is and so on. And then what that gives you the ability to do is, as you've unified all the logs in that one place, and that again, so you can log then that to Cortex Data Lake, and pull those logs back onto Panorama, so you can, all your boxes can log to data lake, and then you can pull that back. But that will then allow you to trace traffic or issues across potentially all the firewalls in your environment. Of course, you can generate reports, analyze and investigate security incidents with the ACC. ACC is awesome. It really is. Once you find your way around it, it's very easy to quickly track down security incidents. You can query the data lake, managed log collectors, or the firewalls directly. So you can, data lake has its own query language, so you can query that directly, as it says, or you can query that through Panorama, or the managed log collectors from Panorama, because Panorama itself can manage log collectors or the firewalls directly. You can use schedule reports. Of course, obviously the reports, as this says, you can't drill down into reports as they are a static sort of snapshot in time, but they are can be regularly scheduled, it says, and can combine views of user activity and threat activity. So if you sort of play around with the reports a little bit, you'll get to a point where you can pretty much paint a picture, but you've got to understand that it is a snapshot in time. So Panorama log collectors, you have local log collectors, so that's your Panorama, and that's run locally on the Panorama server that's supported on the M600, M500, M200, and 100, which of course is end of sale, as it says there, end of life in October 23. You can have dedicated log collectors. So with local log collectors, you've got Panorama just as a management server, but also it's collecting the logs. Or you can have dedicated log collectors. They're managed by Panorama, and once you put a Panorama box into dedicated log collector mode, as it says there, its access is only for device admin. Dedicated log collectors do not support pretty much anything else. They are managed by Panorama. That's the management Panorama, obviously. And their sole purpose is to collect logs and then pass those logs back. And of course, as with everything in Palo Alto, this is designed to be able to scale out to large installations and large networks. So up to 16 managed log collectors can be configured as a collector group. You can configure multiple collector groups because you can end up in a situation where you have panoramas managed by panoramas. But I would say as you go forward, I mean, don't quote me on it, but I would say as you go forward, I think we're going to see more of a move to data lake, where everything's going to be that it can log out of its own internet breakout. So it's logging locally off the box. You haven't got stuff running back across MPLS and VPLS circuits, and then that can be queried by your Panorama. And of course, the good thing with data lake is it can scale as it needs to. It is resilient, very resilient. Palo Alto make sure of that. So the chances of losing your logs are very slim indeed. So now we've gone through that. It's worth looking at because log collectors are something you would tend to use because you don't want to sort of necessarily be running everything back sort of in one go. You'd rather have it all going logging locally, dragging lots and lots of logs back across WAN links. It does start to get expensive. So have a look at the log collectors. The use case for that is that actually, excuse me. The use case is that, so as a use case, they'll want you to look at if you have a lot of log data and you have Panorama in one environment, one data center, and you're looking at disparate data centers, would you have them all logging back to that central one, or would you have all your firewalls logging back? Or would you have them being collected locally and then sending all off in one stream? And of course, the idea then is to send it all off in one stream. Okay, so now we'll go over to the firewall and we'll go through the firewall and have a look at all the log settings on there. Looking at where we configure our server profiles. And our server profiles are configured on the device, and then server profiles, oddly enough. So here we got SNMP trap, which we spoke about before. It's not necessarily, I don't really view that as a log, it is a trap. Syslog, by far the most popular. Email, HTTP, and then you got NetFlow, and then you have other server profiles underneath which are nothing to do with login. So you got your SAML identity provider, Radius, and so on. So what we're really interested in here specifically is these ones. So under this is where you would configure your syslog servers. So in this particular instance, I've got a Splunk server, got the address of it, transport of it, UDP, TCP. You could use TCP for logs. I don't know why you would, because I mean that's a lot of traffic to have coming backwards and forwards when you're logging a lot of things. The port that it's going to be doing on, the format, which is either in BSD or IETF, and then the facility log user is the facility for the log. So in custom log format, as you can see, we've got some already filled in for traffic. So if you want to alter how that log is sent, and specifically what's actually included in that log, you can then create your own log format from here. So you can iron out a lot of the noise, really concentrate on what you want to see, and it's fairly simple. So it's just you click on what you want, and it adds it there, and then that will be included in the log. And if you go to restore default, then it restores the default, which is all of the logs. Okay, you can escape the characters there. If you have any special need to escape characters, you can do it there. And of course, you've got the good old name for Splunk. So once we've configured our syslog servers, and again, it's the same thing. So for our email servers, I haven't got any here, but for email servers, it's then we would create a display name, the email display name. That's the email that it's going to be, it's going to show in the log. From to additional recipients, so CCs, the email gateway, unauthenticated, if it's SNMP, SMTP, sorry, over TLS, then the port number, the version, the authentication method, and so on. So that's basically where you're telling the firewall what account you want it to use. Doesn't mean say it's going to use it, because then you have to create a profile, log forwarding profile, to then add that in, which we'll see in a minute. Okay, so HTTP. That's bizarre. I thought I did actually have some. That's gone missing. And again, that's the same thing. So you have payload format, and again, you can alter that in the headers with the parameters. You can get as in-depth as you want to with your HTTP login, and the tag registration as well. So service dev user ID agent running in order for tag registration to work. So that's all tied into user ID. And so you can register tags with the logs. I'll have a quick look at SNMP trap, because I actually have it trapping to LibreNMS. And again, this is the same thing. You can add several. You can add the IP address or the FQDN. Bear in mind, if you add an FQDN and it is a local box, you're going to have to make sure that the firewall can resolve that IP. And so that's where we configure the servers that we're wanting to target. Now, nothing's going to come of that until we go to objects. I wish I had a PA400. Okay. And so if we come in here, now our log forwarding profile, we can see that we can create our log forwarding profile. So our name, Cortex threat logs, we can put a description if we want. And then our log type, which is what type of log do we want to forward in this list. In this particular case, it's threat. Filter, so you can build the filters in this particular instance. So this one is saying severity critical or high or medium. Be very, very conscious of the fact you have to put or, because if you use AND as a joining logic, you'll never actually get a log that is critical, high, and medium all at the same time, and thus nothing will log. Forward method. So you tick that if you want to log it all to Panorama. You've got built-in actions for quarantine as well. We'll go into that in another video. And here's where so for this particular thing, matching those, so we can add now our servers that we want to log to. So we can add our SNMP server. If we want to trap to that, we can add an email server, and we can add HTTP. Now, I'm not actually going to add that because I will forget to do anything about it. Now, hang on, I just need to take that out there. Okay, let me click OK, and then that's all done. And so then you decide, so for this log forwarding profile, you decide what logs you want to send, what severity, and then where they're going to. Then, when we go into our policies, in its own time, come into here. There we go. So then we have the action there, and then we have the log forwarding, and that is going to go to your log forwarding profile. Now, a little special thing here is, so if I want to use that threat cortex logs one, that's what I'd use. However, I've got a default profile there. And if we go back to our log forwarding profiles, if we look at the default one, so the default log, it's not there by default. It's not there by default. But if you create a log forwarding profile called default, it will automatically populate that box at the end of the actions column for the security policy. What this does is means that you can't forget to add a log forwarding profile, and it's very helpful. So I just have a general forwarding profile that I have here, and then when I create a security policy, it's already added at the end as default. And of course, to go over again, if we go back to policies, as we were saying previously, that all rules are created with one exception, which is this badger just here, which is the intra-zone default rule. The intra-zone default rule is that anything within intra-zone, so anything in the same zones, can communicate freely, and that has no logging on it. And I don't believe, you can't actually add any logging to it, and that is purely and simply because it's a default rule that's on there, and I would imagine that the logs would be pretty high. Although, I mean, as you can see, not really that high compared to others. But anyway, that's the score. Essentially, it's there, but there's no logging on it. If you want to log it, you then clone that rule, create an intra-zone default rule above it, and then add login to that. And then you'd have the login for your intra-zones. Okay, some other logs to be aware of is when you're controlling the device login. So come back to device, and then we have log settings, which is here. Okay, so now this gives us the opportunity then to control the system logs. So system logs, the filter of what we want to log and where we want to forward that to. Do we want to forward it to Panorama? So in this particular instance, we've got SNMP trap, LibreNMS, and then Splunk for syslog. Configuration logs. Again, these speak for themselves pretty much. So that's audit logs basically for the configuration. User ID logs. Hit match for hit match profiles. Global protect, IP tag. And if we go to monitor and bin that, we can see the results of those log settings here. So we got system, say for instance, in its own time. So in system logs there we have the system logs informational that we set. If we wanted to change that, for our remote server, then we would just take informational out of there. So at the minute, although we have informational logs being shown locally, because they always will be, actually forwarding on to Splunk, we don't get those logs because we just get low through critical. Here as well, you can control and manage the logs. So from here, you can clear traffic logs, you can clear the data logs and so on, clear system logs, and here we can set alarms to alarm us when we get to these thresholds. So if we want to say we wanted to change the log database to, if it gets to 70%, we want an alarm. And then the alarms you've got is CLI alarm notifications, enable web alarm notifications, audible alarms. So that's when you hear those horrible things beeping away in the background. When you're in the DC, that'll be an alarm that's going off. And as well, you can also, you can export the table. And that's, you can export the table, export the user ID home and everything, so you can do a report basically on what's being logged and where it's been logged. And that's, yeah, that's pretty much logging. There isn't that much to it, but it will expect you to, more to know about the use cases, really. As I say, it's like, when would you use distributed logging? When would you use collectors? And I say I'd watch out as well for the documentation, because as we move away from the sort of Panorama and log collecting that way up to data lake, I think a lot of things are going to be pushed that way anyway. So just make sure you're aware of data lake. Make sure you're aware of how to query it and how to basically the way that it's set up. So you've got your firewalls log into data lake, and then when you search logs, you pull in those logs into your Panorama instance from data lake. Okay, and just one more thing to show before we move off of this one is the ability to control the partition size of logs. And so look at the logs partition sizes and check for your log collector status and so on. So within here, login and reporting settings. So here you can control the quota, the maximum days of retention. You can see the allocated, non-allocated space, maximum space. You've got log export and reporting, number of versions, so you can really customize any reports that need to be done. Enable threat vault access. So if you get a threat log or whatever, it's a link to threat vault. Stop traffic when log DB is full. You would have to be in a really, really, I guess, risk averse or sensitive business to do that. I don't know. I don't know why you would necessarily do that, but I'm sure there is a reason for it. Predefined reports. So you can make up your predefined reports, select what you want in them, what you don't want in them. And then log collector status. If you had Cortex Data Lake, or you had log collector connected to the box, you'll see here whether it's connected or not. And that's in here. That's in the device setup management section. Okay, so that is it for login. I can't think of anything else at the minute. So enjoy.